This is Your Own Best Company, a podcast for people who love to work alone. Welcome, everyone, to Your Own Best Company. This is a podcast that is designed mostly with people who work alone in mind. I'm Franklin Taggart, and this podcast was my idea. I'm really delighted today to introduce a new friend of mine, Jürgen Strauss. Is a podcaster, speaker, podcast strategist, marketing strategist, and a connector of amazing humans. His business, InnovaBiz, partners with thought leaders to enable them to build sustainable visibility, professional credibility, and a deep connection with their dream clients. Now, here's the place that I just have to say, I'm going to give it a standing ovation, and I agree 100%. He says, our philosophy is to make marketing human again. You all know my H2H marketing promise, humans to humans. As a podcast host, Jürgen has held meaningful conversations with hundreds of outstanding entrepreneurs from all around the world, gaining insight into what makes them tick, what lights them up, why do they do what they do, and what inspiration and value they can add to the rest of the world. And I had the pleasure recently of being a guest on Jürgen's podcast. And what I can tell you is that he is now past 500 episodes, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment. Congratulations and welcome, Jürgen.
Thanks a lot, Franklin, and thanks for having me on your show. It's a real privilege to chat with you again. I really enjoyed our conversation last time round and looking forward to this one.
Wow, I think we could go on for a couple of days, so we may have to just make this chapter one and see where we go from there.
Yeah.
What I'd like to know a little bit about Jürgen is that you started your career path more in a corporate direction. And then at some point you decided that you'd had enough, or maybe it decided that it had enough of you. Tell us a little bit about the story behind that and what led you into entrepreneurship for yourself.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting journey, and it sounds fascinating when I reflect back, but really it was just sort of falling into a series of situations along the way. It started out, I trained as a chemist, a scientist, and I've always been a really keen photographer ever since I can remember. As a very young child, there's photographs of me at 3 years old playing with film boxes, pretending to take photos. So I've always been a passionate photographer, and my first job out of university landed me at ACFA in their research division in Germany, doing some amazing work, some really fascinating and challenging chemistry that really took my training to a whole new level and really enabled me to use that training and use my skills, and also put me into the inside of the photographic world. So I thought, this is the dream job for me.
Yeah.
Of course, my timing wasn't real good because that was just a year or two before the first consumer digital camera was launched onto the market.
Yeah.
And so I lived through, and I was always somebody that was keen on new technology and new things and how that impacted on progress and going forward. So I was always excited by space travel as a child. All these innovations always excited me. So on the one hand, this excited me. On the other hand, I could see the reaction of the decision makers at ACFA in the corporate world to this, what was essentially disrupting their traditional business model. And I was actually working on one project at the time because silver was short, and silver is a key ingredient of imaging film.
Yeah.
And I was actually working on a project to replace silver, do something different. And I kept saying, well, this digital photography would actually replace silver. And they said, no, we want something that you put in the film that'll do what silver does, but is more abundant than silver. And so I could see this. And I was one of the few people in the company that said, look, it might be poor quality now, but we've got to do something about this. We've got to kind of follow this direction and be able to adapt to that change if it really takes off. And unfortunately, as a young research chemist that had only just started there a couple of years earlier, I didn't have much clout. And of course, we know what happened to the film manufacturers. And after 5 years, I decided this wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't going to fulfill the desires and aspirations that I had. So I moved on. I ended up in a company where I had an international role for over 25 years. And when I say an international role, it was a whole series of international roles that started off in a technical support role, through to a research in the scientific area, through to marketing, business management, a whole lot of things. But core to that was traveling internationally a lot and working with our clients and building relationships with them along the way. So that was always something that was really strong for me, bringing that curiosity to learn about the different cultures of these different countries, as well as what their problems were in their business right now that I was in a position to help them solve. And as a result, built all these relationships. What happened near the end of that time was that there were a lot of reorganisations in the company. There were some mergers, there were some acquisitions, and unbeknownst to me, really, I only know this in hindsight, the culture had shifted to the point where it was actually at odds with a lot of my values. And I found myself going to a lot of these companies and talking to the people that I had really close relationships with and friendships in many instances that had developed over that time, having to apologise for the company, having to apologise for how they were being treated by us as an organisation. And that really struggled. And I think one of the key moments was one of our biggest customers, the largest company in a particular field, I won't name it because everybody can probably guess who it is then, they actually placed a ban on anyone from our company visiting them in their headquarters.
Oh, wow.
And they said, but there's two people that we'll let in, and Jürgen and Rich. And Rich is a friend of mine. So there were two of us that had built this relationship, that had established those close relationships and had survived this kind of tsunami of bad blood that had developed. And we're talking a company of about 15,000 employees. Wow. And I said, there's two people that can come, everybody else not. And at that point, I started thinking, it's time to make a change. This is not really good. And that's when I started my own business.
Wow. Now, InnovaBiz is the name of your business, and it's kind of moved in the direction of, helping people with marketing and building content channels and doing things like that. Mm. But when you first started in the entrepreneurship direction, I don't think that was your story, was it?
No, not really. It was an interesting time. What I kind of self-reflected on as my strengths were systemizing the whole business building and marketing process. And I was always a very strong systems person in all the work I did in the corporate world, and at the same time still very creative within those systems. So initially the idea was bringing marketing as a system to small business and also bringing in that relationship aspect. So keeping marketing to the point of it's all about building relationships with people and helping them solve their problems. Again, my timing was a bit off because I started my business in 2007, and as I was starting to find my feet, the global financial crisis hit, and one of the first things all companies pretty much did when that happened, tightening their belt and cutting back on marketing expenses. That's the wrong thing to do, but unfortunately that's what happened. And so I found myself talking to people and getting lots of no's. No, we can't really afford to do marketing right now. And having arguments around, well, you can't afford not to be doing marketing right now. And what happened was I would be asked, in those days, a lot of businesses didn't yet have websites, and I would be asked, but we don't have a website, can you build a website? And the third time I heard that, I sort of went, duh. And I said, yeah, I can build a website, because I had actually been involved in a big corporate website project.
Yeah.
And I was part of the project team that managed that. But of course, I wasn't the person that built the website. I wasn't the person that put together the code. I wasn't the person that got it up on the hosting site and so on. So I thought, well, I can figure this out, because I know the steps that were involved. So I've just got to figure out the nuts and bolts of it. And so I started building websites in those days, and found very quickly that, hey, people want websites because everybody else has websites. They're not really thinking about it in terms of, this is a marketing tool. It really should be doing something rather than just being an online brochure. So I kind of backdoored, if you like, into my marketing systems by building websites and saying to people, okay, I can build you a website, but what do you want the website to do? How's that going to translate into business for you? How are we going to keep people coming back to that website by giving them interesting things to read or to watch or to listen to? And so it kind of almost came full circle to that. And at some point, it came enough full circle that it said, that I was able to say, well, I'm not really interested in building websites. If you need a website, I've now got some strategic partners that's their thing. They love doing that. I'll get them on board. I'll work with them to develop the strategy around the marketing. And our focus shifted back, if you like, onto that whole marketing aspect. And of course, the podcast came along at some point, and then it sort of narrowed down much more to podcasting and using the medium of podcasting to generate content.
Now, I think we figured out the other day that you'd been podcasting since 2014, or did you have another podcast before that?
No, that's when I started podcasting. That's right.
Okay.
I'd been listening probably since the early 2000s. In fact, going back before that, I was always keen. I am a keen reader, but I was always keen to listen to audio books, because that was a time-saving element to me. In all the travels that I did and all the commuting that I did, I used that time to listen to audio books. And so the audio medium always interested me, but it wasn't until 2014 that it dawned on me, through a mentor who kind of showed me what was really needed. It dawned on me that I didn't really need a professional radio studio to start my own podcast.
Well, it fascinates me that, in particular, the area around websites, and you were there at that kind of critical moment when people started to realize a website is no longer just an option; it is, it's essential.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, how did you help people understand what a website could do for them?
Yeah, a lot of it was demonstrating on we set up some prototypes and demonstrating on prototypes. And when typically somebody would say, I want a website because my competitor's got a website, or my supplier's got a website and it looks really cool. And then as we started, there'd be this, can we change that color to be a little bit less red and a little bit more orange, and that kind of thing. And I'd said, well, let's focus on the important stuff first, and that sort of stuff. I mean, as long as it's reddish orange and not blue, that will be a big deal. But if we just lighten the orange a little, that's a lot of work for really no return at this point. Let's focus on how do we get people to come on the website and say, wow, this looks like an interesting product or service, and take some action, as in call you up or make an appointment to see you, or even make a purchase then and there if they're ready to do that. And how do we map out the steps involved, and how do we build the back end onto that takes them through that journey? So that was always my focus, and that was the biggest frustration I had around building websites, is that people were still coming back, the font's too small, or can we just make this one italic, or can we move this over a couple of pixels? And I was thinking, that's perfectionism at work and perfectionism that doesn't really get any return, because I don't know of anyone that goes onto a website and takes a ruler or something and measures where the pixels are and how things are lined up. As long as it looks professional, it's obviously a rubbish looking website is not going to attract people, but getting to that fine tune. And so we built these prototypes, and we started doing things like embedding appointment calendars on there, embedding booking systems on there, embedding the contact forms, the simple things like contact forms to get people to contact the business, and connecting them to their Google My Business property, so that they had the option of the website visitor had the option of seeing their address and seeing some other things about them through Google. And of course that Google property comes up really highly on the relevant search terms as well.
So was this all before like templates and WordPress, or was this kind of at the beginning of the WordPress movement?
This was at the beginning of the WordPress movement.
Okay.
So one of the first ones I did, in fact, the first website I was involved in building in my small business was my own one, and I got somebody's help to do that, and it was done in Joomla. Is it Joomla?
Oh yeah, Joomla. I remember that.
And I thought, and that was partly why, when the first few people asked me, we don't have a website, I like to build a website, I sort of reflected on the hassles I was having with my own website and thought, I don't want to multiply that. And at some point I discovered WordPress and thought, well, this is actually a lot easier. And we switched our own website to WordPress, and that's when we started building other people's websites as well.
Now, were you still in kind of that period where you had to have a pretty good understanding of HTML and CSS in order to make it work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there were no page builders around at those times, and there were lots of different plugins, but you had to know which plugins would play well with other plugins, and there was a lot of times where there'd be things that just break. You bring in one plugin and it just wouldn't work well with another one, and they'd just break because there was a conflict in the code or some overlapping commands.
And then WordPress would update and all the plugins would fail.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, the old days.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Well, I'm also curious, when you started to add podcasting to your mix, what was the appeal of podcasting to you personally?
Well, the first thing was I was always a keen listener to audio, as I mentioned, and I'd been listening to audio to podcasts as they developed, and thought, this is really cool. There's lots you can learn there. And the mentor I mentioned who got me into podcasting, he'd been running a podcast for, I think he was up to about 50 episodes, and he was inviting people on, experts in his particular area that brought different perspectives or brought expertise that he didn't necessarily have. And I really enjoyed listening to his because I was part of that community. And when he suggested this, immediately I connected the dots and thought, I've got all these contacts in the corporate world that I have good relationships with. They're all around the world. They're in very senior positions in some of them very large companies, very innovative companies. Innovation is kind of my thing. It's innovation in business. That's what the name is. Yeah. And I thought that all fits together beautifully. I can reach out to these people. I know them already. Most of them are likely to say, yes, of course, I'll jump on a conversation with you. And so that's how we got started, because I got really excited about reconnecting professionally with those people that I was connected to and that I really had no reason to connect professionally to from my small business, because the direction was a little different. And then to have conversations, explore what they were doing, and really dig into some of the things that small business could learn from what these people were doing in big business and what innovative things were going on and how they were thinking and what their mindset was and a whole lot of things. And as it went on, I just kept getting more and more excited because I discovered I could dig even deeper and I could take lessons and connect lessons that were seemingly totally unrelated, or from a business that was seemingly totally unrelated to the audience I had, but then connected back so that there were lessons to actually apply in the businesses of my audience. And so that's how it started. And then, of course, what happened was some of those people said, "Oh, I want you to meet this other person. I think he'd be a good guest or she'd be a good guest to your podcast." And we've just been on, when it first started, a lot of these folks were kind of the second generation owners of businesses.
Right.
So they were stepping up into the CEO roles, and a lot of their personal development involved going to places like INSEAD in France or Wharton, places like that, and doing advanced business management or leadership courses, whatever it might be. And of course, in those courses, they would meet other people in similar positions from different parts of the world. And so they started connecting me with these people. And before I knew it, this developed into a flywheel that had its own momentum. And of course, I started asking people as well at the end, well, who else should I bring on the show? So some people get really excited and have sent guests my way. I've got a couple of people that it's 3 or 4 years since they've been on the show, and they keep sending me emails saying, "Hey, I just met somebody that would be a great guest for your show."
Oh, wonderful.
So it's kind of this flywheel that actually is hard to stop now, but it's exciting.
That kind of word of mouth is exciting, and it's fun to see it take off like that. In the over 500 episodes that you've done, what are the ones that just stand out to you as the most memorable?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I mean, sometimes I forget some of them until I hear the person's name, or I see it pop up in my search or somewhere, and I think, yeah, that was a fantastic episode. So it's really hard to answer that question straight off the top of my head. There's one that stands out, though, because it was very early on, and I was just so surprised to get this person on, and that was Michael E. Gerber from the E-Myth. And there are a combination of circumstances that led to me being able to connect with him and bring him on the podcast, and it was episode 54. So I was still about a year into the podcast, still finding my way. I was probably starting to build some confidence with the guests I'd had at that point, and getting off the sort of scripted process that I had and having natural conversations. And then I landed Michael E. Gerber, and I thought, wow. And I remember jumping on the call and feeling totally nervous. I was shaking in my boots, and I thought, I've got to get a grip of myself here. But he was just such a lovely person, full of energy, dived straight in. He challenged some of the things. I asked him, I think the standard question in the buzz round, the first one is, what do people need to do to be more innovative? And he came straight back and said, "You're asking the wrong question." And he then went on about a 10-minute explanation of what the difference between innovation and creativity is. Yeah. So I still remember that. So that one sticks in my mind for a lot of reasons. I mean, it was a fabulous conversation, but it came from this point of view of, I was just in awe of the fact that I had Michael E. Gerber there to chat to.
Very cool. Episode 54, folks. That's the one we need to check out. And before I forget, Jürgen's podcast is called InnovaBuzz. His business is Innovabiz. His podcast is InnovaBuzz, and it's available on all of your favorite podcast channels. Let's shift gears just a little bit, Jürgen, and talk a little bit about how you help people now to make these same kinds of things happen for their business.
Yeah, well, what we do now is, I mentioned the flywheel with the podcast, and we've taken that idea and built both a marketing system and a podcasting system around that. And essentially it comes back to the way we do marketing and the way we do our podcast. And so we start off with getting really clear about ourselves, our business, why we're doing this, and what strengths we're bringing to the table. Then getting really clear about who our dream customer is, or our dream audience in the case of the podcast. Then getting really clear about what's our message and what's their issue or problem that we have the ability or the product or the service to enable them to solve. And then how do we deliver that message? So they're kind of the first 4 steps. And essentially we help people systemize their marketing, their podcasting, their content creation in a way that gets really clear about that message up front and who their audience is, and starts to build that really deep connection. And then we have a series of steps that are all around beginning a conversation with the right people. So it's not, the next step is not, okay, I know what I've got, I know my strengths, I know who the audience is, I know what their needs are, now I'm going to go out and sell them on this. That's not the next step. The next step is starting the conversations in places where they are. So that might be on social media, that might be on podcasts, that might be in a video channel, that might be in events, whether virtual or live events, that might be at exhibitions, wherever they are.
Yeah.
And starting conversations and then nurturing those conversations with the right people to the point where something might happen further. So the whole customer journey from when they first get to know you, start to build that like and trust platform, and then going on to deliver an exceptional experience where essentially that's the sale and the experience they have of the product. And in the case of the podcast, the podcast experience, whether it's a guest on the podcast or whether it's the audience listening.
Yeah. And
then the kind of closing the circle of the flywheel is the follow-up, maintaining the and continuing to nurture that relationship such that because they already know you and like you and they've had exceptional experience with you, when you launch new products, they're likely to be the first people that are interested and are going to make a decision to buy. Mm-hmm. And then also the referral. So that referral engine of who else do you know that needs this service or that could come on my podcast. And then the final step that closes the circle is to continually look at improvement. What can we improve there? It's also a celebration step. So, I'm sort of basking a little bit in the celebration of 500 episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast. We often don't take time to celebrate what we have achieved and where we've come on our journey. Yeah. At the same time, of course, reflecting on what can be improved, systemizing the things. How can we bring people on board to help run this? What's my key role in this system now? And how can we automate some stuff, but at the same time, while we automate that, keeping everything human and keeping that deep connection. So that's kind of the flywheel process and the marketing process that we use, and we help people set that up and implement it in their businesses. And a lot of what we're doing now is around the podcasting and using podcasting medium in a way that helps people generate content easily, effectively, without taking up a lot of their time.
Yeah. What I was going to ask is how much technical know-how do these folks need to have if they want to start a podcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends really. If they want to do it themselves, well, then they need to get into some of the technical know-how. Yeah. So you need to know how to host it, where to host it, how to send it to the directories, how to set it up properly in a way that all the directories, when people search there, that podcast can be found, how to connect it to different places, how to set up a website for that. So there is a fair bit of technical stuff there. However, we have services where we do it with you, and in that case we can kind of handle the technical back end, and the person can focus on the areas where They know how to do the things that need to be done. And also we have a fully done for you service that all they need to do is turn up and have a conversation with us around their topic of expertise, and we handle everything else. So that's the one that you don't need any technical expertise. In fact, you can leverage your own expertise and your own content to simply expand your reach and expand that content out into different media, whether that's a podcast or a video.
Yeah. If somebody is going to start a podcast, how would you advise them to grow their audience for that podcast?
I think it's about consistency. So consistently publishing episodes, and then using social media, using your network, using email marketing. So if people have an email list, making sure that those people on that email list know of the podcast and know each time an episode is published, asking those people to share the episode with others is probably, and again, that's this word of mouth thing, that's probably the strongest one. And then social media promotion is a big one. Having really valuable information in that podcast is kind of the core of that. And then inviting people to share that with others that this information might help. And if there's really valuable content there that teaches people something or connects them with something that they need, then those people will share it with others that have the same need.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to really feel like that your podcast was starting to, really grab an audience and hold it? And it was really starting to grow a little bit more from word of mouth referral rather than you doing a lot of the front end work. How long did that take for you?
It was probably a year, I'd say. It might have been a little bit earlier than a year, but it would have been within that first year. It's sort of after 12 months, I started to feel much more confident. And where I realized that it was certainly getting traction with listeners was when I would go to some of our local networking events in person before COVID and introduce myself, and people would say, "I've heard you on a podcast." And I thought, well, I don't know this person, yet they've heard me on the podcast. So, and that happened quite a lot. And I realized that, we're getting traction with audience. The other thing I'd suggest also for somebody thinking about starting a podcast, one of the things that is really good to do is get on podcasts as a guest, like I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
And because you don't have to have any technical know-how there, because the podcast host does all the technical back-end work. And that will give you an idea, first of all, of, do I like this medium? Do I like this way of showing up? And if the answer to that is yes, then take the next step and start your own podcast. Secondly, it gives you some practice of having conversations, presenting your message, and getting in front of different audiences. And then the third thing, coming back to what you asked before about growing your own podcast, if you have your own podcast, getting on other people's podcasts as guests is another really powerful way of getting in front of a new audience. And of course, you talk about your podcast there, and a lot of people that are interested from this new audience will check out the podcast, and if they like what they hear, they'll keep following it.
Very good. You mentioned having a website associated with the podcast. Tell me a little bit about how you have used your website to augment the podcast experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things that we do is produce a blog post from each episode, and on that blog post we have a bunch of show notes. So we don't transcribe each episode word for word. We did at the beginning and found that really it was a lot of work for very little return, meant most people weren't really reading.
Yeah.
So we started doing these show notes, which essentially is like, imagine you go to a lecture at university and you take some notes. So that's sort of the concept. And we've refined that to the point where it's something that my editor, who does all this for me now, she produces these in an hour or two, and they're really right on the money. And I know a lot of my audience, they've said, that really differentiates us from a lot of the other podcasts they listen to, because they can listen and they can jump on this blog post and read the summary, and they can also go back later on and read the summary, and that will remind them of a lot of the conversation. And in that we have shareable social media clips, and we have the audio embedded, of course, so that people can listen from that page. And we invite comments in that blog post, although that doesn't get a lot of comments there. Haven't quite worked out why that is. We tend to get a lot more just when people go to the review sites and comment in like Apple Podcasts or Podchaser or something like that.
That's been my experience as well.
The other thing that we then do, and we may start to incorporate more of this, is a very specific call to action out of each episode. So I used to say that, well, my big takeaway from this conversation was whatever it was. Now I'm turning that around and using that as, okay, what action would I take out of this conversation? Because I think of each of these conversations as a masterclass for me. A masterclass from an expert in their field. And and I'm lucky because I don't have to pay for that masterclass. Often these people might be, Michael E. Gerber, it might be tens of thousands of dollars for an hour masterclass with him one-on-one. And so I have the benefit of having that conversation, asking any question I like, and then of course I get to share it with my audience, and so they think I'm a hero too. But for me then, I say, well, if this were a masterclass that I pay for, well, what do I take out of it? What are the actions I'm going to do as a result? So I'm starting to ask myself that question at the end of each podcast episode, and then kind of present a challenge to the audience and saying, well, here's one thing I took out of this. Imagine if you took this action, what that would do for your business. So it's kind of that challenge. And we're exploring how we might build that into maybe something that will generate more engagement and actually more activity within a community. So there's some ideas for the future. Stay tuned.
Oh, excellent! That'll be exciting to watch unfold. If you were starting your podcast over again right now, what would you do differently?
I'd probably, when we first started, we used video. And then probably about 20 or 30 episodes in, we stopped doing video. We did a few in video, so Michael E. Gerber's episode is video. But we found that very few people watched the video in those days, and it was a lot of editing work extra on the video. So then we switched to audio, and that saved us a lot of editing work and didn't really impact on the growth of the listenership. What I do now, and we're exploring doing this actually, is considering live streaming video, the conversation. And then we have the video feed and just leave that unedited as is on the live stream, use that video recording then obviously in places where it's stored as a recording, and take the audio from that and edit the audio as we currently do. So if I were to start again right now, I'd probably do that straight away. There's a lot of technology, of course, now that allows you to do that wasn't around back in 2014.
Right. Have you done anything with the things like Clubhouse or Fireside or I think Green Room was Spotify's one? I can't remember.
I've had a look at. I've set myself up with a Clubhouse profile, but it kind of got very noisy there very quickly, and I thought, I'm not sure this is something I should be focusing on right now. It's just parked, so I may come back to that. Spotify's Green Room, I think I set up an account there as well. But I looked at it and thought this is sort of their version of Clubhouse, so I parked that along with Clubhouse. So it's something to that I'll keep in mind. It may be an option for the future. What's been your experience with that?
Well, the thing that I love about it is the spontaneity of it, the spontaneous conversations that happen, and the proximity that people can find with each other randomly, really. It's like you can end up in a room with somebody that you would never, ever, ever imagine that it was possible, and then you're having a conversation with them. I am intrigued by that, and I've enjoyed the little bit of time that I've spent on Clubhouse. I'm interested in Fireside. That's the one. It's a fairly new one, but it's more of a podcast platform that is about spontaneous conversations. So it's like they're being recorded and they're being broadcast much like a podcast would be. And that is something that I'm intrigued by, because I just love to have those kind of open forums where people can talk about anything and the conversation can go anywhere. I love interviews because we can be a little bit more structured and we can be a little bit more intentional about what we put together. But there's always, like with those kinds of conversations, it feels like to me that there's always kind of a wild card that you never know exactly where it's going to go. And that's exciting and intriguing to me. So.
Yeah, one of the challenges on those kind of platforms is who's going to be the facilitator. And I guess I didn't listen to a lot of Clubhouse broadcasts or whatever they call them, but the few I listened to, it seemed to be that there wasn't anybody facilitating. Yeah. And it was like the people that had the loudest voice, or the people that were sort of, the most outgoing, I guess, to put it in that way, they were the ones that had held the conversation. So there was nobody there kind of moderating and allowing everybody to have a say and maybe directing the conversation some more. And I much prefer those kind of things. And a moderator or a facilitator can still allow the conversation to go off in tangents and go in different directions and be flexible around that. But there's still that level of, okay, let's make this a great experience for everybody on the call and also for everybody listening.
Yeah, you might check in with it again because they've added some really good moderation tools. And so moderators now are kind of, they're the most common kind of room, is a moderated room. So it's a little less of a Wild West kind of an adventure.
Maybe it's time to have another look and play.
Well, Jürgen, the last question that I have for you is, where do you want people to go next if they are interested in anything that they have heard you say today? Where would you like them to go from here?
Well, the best thing is to have a look at my website, which is innovabiz.com.au, or if you just go innovabiz.co, it'll get you to the same place. And on that website, there is a little widget bubble that comes up, which is a short video of me, and you can actually start a conversation with me by responding to that video, either with your own video, with an audio message, or with text, whatever you prefer, and begin that conversation. Also, you'll find there our podcast, the InnovaBuzz Podcast. It'll be linked there. And the flywheel process that I mentioned is there as an audio program, which you can also download from that website.
InnovaBiz.com.au or InnovaBiz.co will get you there. All right.
Yep.
Well, Jürgen, this has been, again, another pleasure. And I think that we have a lot more to say to each other. But our time has rapidly come to a close today. And I just want to thank you for your time and for your insights that you've shared here on my show today.
Well, thank you, Franklin. It's been a pleasure. And like you say, we've got to continue these conversations.
Thanks for listening to Your Own Best Company. If you enjoyed the show, would you do me a favor and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast host? If you really love it, leave me a review or share it with your circles. If you feel like your career is reaching a dead end, or you're feeling a deep sense of dissatisfaction in your work right now, I help people discover their gifts and then find or create new opportunities that are the best fit for their talent, experience, and lifestyle. Email me at coaching@franklintaggart.com for more information. I also help people start, finish, and launch creative projects, and I offer an ongoing marketing mastermind for solopreneurs and freelancers. More information on these programs and services can be found at franklintaggart.com. Thanks again for spending this time with me.